Hello, my name is Vojtáš. I am a Salesian of Don Bosco, and now I am teaching education, Salesian education, in the Pontifical Salesian University in Rome. I have done my research and PhD thesis in education and communication, so I would like to share with you some insights on artificial intelligence and its possible application in social sciences and in education. So in a specific way, we will be dividing this presentation in three topics. So it will be around social communication and digital culture, a theoretical introduction into communication theory. Then the second part will be about how generative AI works, because it will help us to understand the algorithm, at least in a general way, and it will help us to develop and to use AI in education. So I will show you some simple applications, simple and more complex applications in education, and what it could imply for the future. So let us go inside the themes. I think it could be useful to present the communication cultures throughout history. For me, it seems reasonable to view the current communicative revolution in the context of past major shifts, such as the transition from oral to written communication and from manual writing to Gutenberg's press. Each change did not eliminate the previous one, but integrated it into a new synthesis that had to manage the flow of information, conversation, and texts. So the cultures that evolve are not exclusive, so it doesn't mean that oral culture is not present in current times. It is, and it's the majority of our communication, face-to-face communication, and also in social structures, in communities and groups. That's the oral culture that is still very strong. Although we speak a lot about digital culture and communication and all the technology that influences us, we see a certain type of synthesis, of a blending of these three cultures. So let's delve into it. So oral culture mainly uses hearing and listening to the other person's words. So the sense we are using, it's more about the sound waves and listening. We cannot stop the sound that vanishes, is evanescent. And also the oral culture, when we speak to each other, it has a special relationship with time, because the message that we, in a certain sense, we heard, we have to memorize it, but our memory is not strictly precise as a computer or as a photocopy. So the message changes over time, is interpreted. So the category of time is pretty important. Also, the oral culture is the primary one. It transmits traditions, culture, knowledge through words and texts. Because it uses memory, so organizing speech has to be done according to certain patterns. There are some characteristics that are described, formulas. There are some repeated sentences several times. There is a rhythm. There are some fixed schemes in the narratives. So rhythm is important. And also characteristics that is important is the extroversion. We have to interact with other people in order to communicate with them. And in that sense, it's socializing, and it continues in history. So the message in an oral culture is developing, is evolving. And a good example of oral culture could be also the revelation in the Ancient Testament, in the Bible. It was first an oral message that was written only afterwards. Every culture has its own iconic people, persons or groups. So in the oral culture, Homer is famous in the Western world as the famous narrator of the traditions of the ancient Greeks. In the same sense, in many cultures, there is this structure of a circle of elders, a certain hierarchy in the society is reflected also in a communication culture. So if I wanted to limit the access to some information, I had to limit the access into a physical space, into a relational space in the oral culture. Let's delve into the written culture. That is pretty much different because it uses sight as the primary sense, not the hearing, and in that sense has a privileged relationship with space, because the message is distributed not in sound waves but in message in a physical form. And the written culture has a certain tendency towards introversion because the book and the writing prefers an individual use through reading and writing, which is isolated from others, or at least it doesn't have to be done together. So it has a certain tendency towards individualization. So it realizes a distancing between the subject and the object, which is helping into an in-depth analysis. So the writing remains in time, it doesn't change. So I can read the same Bible after 2000 years. Of course, we can always discuss the evolution of text, but the text as a principle remains. In confrontation to the oral tradition and to our own memories that evolve, that are interpreted in time by psychological processes, the writing remains. So it has a certain tendency towards precision in formulation. And this kind of introversion and individualistic and discontinuous nature with the past creates a different type of culture and communication. So in this sense, we have also different icons of the written culture, the humanistic approach to culture, to text, to hermeneutics of the text. Also the scientific nature or a scientific formula is also a text. It's a written culture that fixes some relationship between elements. So what is important in this sense is technology, because also, and we can see these dynamics in the text production. First, we had to transcript volumes. Every book was very precious. It needed a long time and a complicated production and also to be produced. So there was also a control of the production. The Gutenberg revolution did a major shift in communication culture, like paradigm shift, because it put into crisis all the cultural monopolies, because the production control of written and transcribed text was costly, but it could be monopolized and controlled. Gutenberg made a major shift towards the democratic approach to text. Then the mechanized printing in the 18th, 19th century did a major evolution also, because there were many more texts. Also the offsetting was another step towards major diffusion of text, because one does not need many technical skills to produce copies. And then also electronic text with its low cost, also low effort, but sometimes also, as we see in internet, low quality of text, because everyone can be an author. So if everyone, also the quality of the text, it becomes much more everyday communication that is diffused, that is distributed in the channels of the everyday digital culture. So also, if we are still within the written culture, we can see how also generative AI is producing texts. So the algorithmic production of text and makes the machine and the algorithm an author. So it's not only a human author that is exclusive in the production of text. Also, there is a different other aspects of management of text, because there is always a need to, in a certain sense, to manage text, what is distributed in what sense. So oral narratives were managed by levels of group membership and social dynamics. The written text has been managed in a more complicated way. So we had libraries and private collections. We had journals and some communities of scientists. We have them. There was also a censorship. There are some ethical rules about how to be and who can become in a certain community of professionals like journalists. There is also always some kind of underground movement or revolutionary, like samizdat, self-production, self-publication of texts. Also, there is a danger of a cognitive overload, because the written texts are many, and you have to manage the ingestion of text on the reading process. Also, there are some economic criteria for production and communication. So all these cultures have to deal with the management of texts, and it will come also into the digital world. There is also an interesting shift, because when the text was exclusive, sacred, the writing and reading, that was a capacity that made a difference in accessing information, and so it was valued. Then with the democratization and the industrialization, the literacy of the masses, it simplified the content. So writing became also a tool for democratization, but it also was the process of inclusiveness also trivialized in a certain sense the texts. If we see some of the novels of the 1500s, and if we go to the Utopia of Sir Thomas More and some other novels, some Italians one, or the world literature, it has a certain level and elaboration of content. When there was the distribution of simple, and there was a need to sell many copies, so we had very simple stories in the 20th century, many simple adventure stories in that time. So we see only in the 1920s and 1930s in the United States there were millions of copies of each issue of these journals of entertainment. And now we see a different shift towards digital culture, and because digital is not only about digital texts, it's inherently multimedia. So let's see how do we use multimedia. Of course, this is a simplification and only an introduction. So we can see that sight is a primary sense and hearing is only secondary. So it's more about watching something, to be in front of a display, no? But it's multisensory in its nature. It's also virtual. We access to some texts and multimedia that are in the internet, that it's somewhere virtual. It's not here with me. I have no control about it. So there is the category between virtual and real. It has, the digital culture, as we live it, has a privileged relationship with the immediate content, with here and now, and it is designed to produce sensations and emotions here and now. It doesn't have the stability of a written text, which is there for centuries. It changes. Also the internet websites, if we go back, there are some websites that doesn't exist anymore after some years. So, and services and logics. So it changes a lot. And also multimedia is done in a sense that it has to produce a certain identification between subject and the message. It should be persuasive in a way. Many times, because the multimedia is used, is because it wants to give you a message and to persuade you about something. It promotes emotional experiential synthesis. It's not analytical. You are overwhelmed by the quantity of the media that you consume. You don't have normally the time to process everything in a detached way. There is no detachment. It's a flow of information, and so it could be manipulative also in a certain way. So it tends towards introversion in a certain sense, because we are isolated when we consume multimedia. I am alone with my phone, my computer. We create a certain sense of isolation, of an island. Also, when there is all this interaction and multi-user communication and the Web 2.0 and other numbers in succession, it's not really a community. It's also not a mass of people as it was in the written culture. A Korean philosopher that lives in Berlin, he theorizes this idea of internet swarms, where people create certain aggregations, but it's more about emotion. I feel like I am identified with the current of emotion, I have a certain feel. So it's not a community of philosophers. It's more about a feeling about something, and we are many times we are isolated in our bubbles of perceptions. So we think the world is like the data we receive from the multimedia culture, but we are confronted only with a selected small amount of multimedia that are confirming oftentimes our biases. So it has a certain individualism, and also it's discontinuous with the past. It changes rapidly. Of course, we have some icons of contemporary digital culture. So there are geeks, hackers, also the startup culture. It's being about also an economic model that is linked to the digital culture. So we have creativity enthusiasts, gamers, influencers, YouTubers, of course. Those are some icons, typical people and persons that are representing the digital culture. If we want to see a certain synthesis of this comparison, we can see the differences between the senses we use in oral, written and digital culture. Also, the interaction in the oral culture is much more collective than the individual reading of a book. And in a digital culture, it's more anonymous. It's also individual, but also when we interact online, I don't meet a person many times. I meet someone, some type of text or a photo or a multimedia content, and I don't know who is behind it. Also, the community type that is created is different. There are tribes, there is a mass society of a written culture who consumes millions and millions of books of the same book. So there is a certain standardization. There are the digital swarms of people. Also, the approach of how do we communicate is different. There is narrative and rhetoric approach. Then we have the analytical and critical approach in written culture. And we have in digital culture more the consuming virtual type of approach. Also, the stability of text changes. There are different regulations. Also, what's the collection of the information? What is the source of information? There were the narrators, the libraries. Now we use search indexes. We have wikis, collaborative projects like Wikipedia. And there is always some unofficial type of communication. There were heretics, outcasts from the community or from the hierarchical structure. In the written culture, there was this self-publication, Sam is dead. And now we have also the deep web, the piracy, and the non-official content. We have seen some of the characteristics of these three different cultures. It's interesting to see some parallels in the change. I think that the change in the digital era can be as dramatic as those changes during Gutenberg's printing era, which significantly contributed to the transition from the medieval period to the modern era in Europe, especially in the Western world. Then the digital future will be probably dominated by unintended consequences, similar as in the printing era. It will take decades before the full anthropological effects of the digital era will be seen. I think while events occur more rapidly in our times, but the profound change in mindset of the whole population goes with the rhythms of generational and intergenerational education and paradigm shifts. It's very easy to make some technological advance, but it's not so easy to change the mindset of the people. So in the next chapter, we will be confronted with the mechanics and the invention of neural networks and generative AI.